It's Wednesday, the 5th February 2025. Let's take a look at the headlines making waves in Nigeria today. First, the Punch newspaper. The leading story. Marketers may dump NNPCL as price war with Dangote rages. Dealers adopt MRS logo to access cheaper Dangote petrol. Consider NNPCL franchise suspension. You can get the complete story on page 29 of the Punch newspaper and above the leading story from the left. PDP Secretary, Wike camp writes Supreme Court ahead of BOT meeting. You can get the complete story on page 2 of the Punch newspaper. Lagos Assembly may write Tinubu over Obasa, says GAC members. You can get the complete story on page 22 of the Punch newspaper. Government releases power tariff hike guidelines for discourse. You can get the complete story on page 29 of the Punch newspaper. Tax reform. Reps set for fresh debate. Hold closed door sections. You can get the complete story on page 2 of the Punch newspaper. And below the leading story, DR Congo soldiers, rebels clash death toll hits over 900. You can get the complete story on page 22 of the Punch newspaper. Gunmen kidnap 7 Ondo travelers, 27 suspects arrested. You can get the complete story on page 4 of the Punch newspaper. Police arrest suspended Ogun monarch, hunt accomplices. You can get the complete story on page 4 and 5 of the Punch newspaper. Death toll rises to 15 in Ebonyi community herdsman's killing. You can get the complete story on page 5 of the Punch newspaper. Moving over to the next paper, Nigeria Tribune. The leading story. FEC approves 758 billion naira to clear pension liabilities. OK's 30 million euro concessional loan for support student housing project. 80 billion naira for reconstruction, expansion of Aliu Dam in Borno. 126 billion naira for MRI CT scanners at OAU. Others. Federal government says US, UK patients now seek medical care in Nigeria. You can get all of this on page 4 of the Tribune and above the leading story from the left. 29 states remove speakers in 26 years. You can get the complete story on page 18 of the newspaper. Use criticisms against Nigeria to prioritize development, says Obi. You can get the complete story on page 6 of the Tribune. Nigeria to experience severe dry spell of over 27 to 40 days in some areas, says federal government. Delta, Bayelsa, Oyo, Ogun, Osun, Lagos, 7 other states to witness early rain, says Nimet. You can get the complete story on page 5 of the newspaper and below the leading story from the left. Brain drain. Nigerian doctors earn less than cleaners abroad, says Afe Babalola. You can get the complete story on page 13 of the newspaper. Police arrest suspended Ogun traditional ruler over assault. Threat to life. Court grants him bail. You can get the complete story on page 5 of the newspaper. Gunmen attack bus, abduct travelers in Ondo. You can get the complete story on page 26 of the Tribune. Obership crisis. Adeleke only followed process met on ground, says Osun government. You can get the complete story on page 3 of the newspaper. Moving over to the next paper, Vanguard. The leading story. Alarm as cartel targets teenage girls for organ harvesting. You can get the complete story on page 14 of the Vanguard and above the leading story. Federal government to roll out 7 million smart meters in 2025. You can get the complete story on page 20 of the Vanguard. Lagos Assembly crisis. Bids to oust Obasa's successor hits brick wall. GAC briefs Tinubu. You can get the complete story on page 21 of the Vanguard. I've never said Tinubu, Akume, Carlo, we are corrupt when I was EFCC chairman, says Ribadu. You can get the complete story on page 5 of the Vanguard. El-Rufai slams Governor Sani over sycophantic support for Tinubu. You can get the complete story on page 8 of the Vanguard. And below the leading story from the right, NCAA gives Kenya Airways 48 hours to apologize for passengers' maltreatment. You can get the complete story on page 8 of the Vanguard. And below the leading story still under the picture from the left, federal government's flag golfs toiling on federal highways. You can get the complete story on page 9 of the Vanguard. Federal government to take over incomplete Lagos-Ibadan expressway sections by April, says Umahi. You can get the complete story on page 10 of the Vanguard. Ihanacho faces Borough fans' rejection. You can get the complete story on page 39 of the Vanguard. Moving over to the next paper, Daily Trust. The leading story. Ubasani, Aerofy differ over Tinubu. You can get the complete story on page 4 of the newspaper. And below the leading story from the left, northern states to experience delayed rainfall, says Kayamo. You can get the complete story on page 24 of the newspaper. Motorists to pay 1,600 toll fee on Abuja Makurdi Highway. You can get the complete story on page 10 of the newspaper. Gunmen adopt 10 passengers in Ondo. You can get the complete story on page 6 of the newspaper. 165 illegal immigrants arrested in Kebbi. You can get the complete story on page 6 of the newspaper. Teacher dismissed for impregnating student in Ekiti. You can get the complete story on page 21 of the newspaper. Ketco confirms sack of 450 workers. You can get the complete story on page 31 of the newspaper. Rep summons FCT director over land racketeering. You can get the complete story on page 18 of the newspaper. Moving over to the next paper, Business Day. The leading story. Inside Nigeria's $10 billion palm oil export, Okomo Presco earned over $18 million in export exchange gain. You can get the complete story on page 31 of the newspaper. Where revenue falls to offset mounting debts. You can get the complete story on page 30 of the newspaper. Why Trump's oil price cut won't budge Nigeria, says OPEC. You can get the complete story on page 30 of the newspaper. Footprints of Zenith Bank's go-getter, Amazon. You can get the complete story on page 18 of the newspaper. Moving over to the last paper on the list, The Guardian. The leading story. Federal government, NAD, CMDs, others bicker over state of health sector. Good rating. You can get the complete story on page 6 of The Guardian and above the leading story from the left. APC moves indirect primary ahead of Anambra gubernatorial poll. You can get the complete story on page 7 of The Guardian. GAC meeting ends in deadlock as parties disagree on Obasa's fate. You can get the complete story on page 5 of The Guardian. EFCC arraigns 11 Chinese for alleged cyber fraud. Others, you can get the complete story on page 5 of The Guardian. 4 oil firms post 386 billion naira profit amid uncertainty. Security concern. You can get the complete story on page 15 of The Guardian and below the leading story from the left. First Lady donates 100 million to Niger tanker explosion victims. Visit IBB Abdulsalami. You can get the complete story on page 30 of The Guardian. PFN declares national rebirth, vows to expose corrupt leaders. You can get the complete story on page 30 of The Guardian. World Cancer Day. Federal government to explore health insurance for cancer. You can get the complete story on page 3 of The Guardian. Senate threatens to arrest IGP, Customs CG, FIRS, NNPCL, CBN heads over audit snub. You can get the complete story on page 6 of The Guardian. Mo Abudu showcases Nigeria's creative economy with Naija Creates in London. You can get the complete story on page 4 of The Guardian. And these are the headlines making waves in Nigeria today. If any of these headlines caught your attention, do get a copy of the paper to read the complete story.
Visit Housing TV Africa on YouTube and click on the subscribe button. Subscribe to Housing TV Africa to stay updated on latest happenings in Nigeria's housing sector. Follow our social media pages, like and share our posts on Facebook, Housing TV Africa, on Twitter, Housing TV Africa, Instagram, Housing TV Africa. Join the conversation and keep up with latest housing updates.
Housing TV Africa, your first in housing development broadcasting.